So thanks for coming.
Thank you for having me.
How you feeling?
I am a little nervous. I'm not normally nervous in front of a crowd, but I think that's because most of the time I'm making it up what I'm saying, but this time it's kind of real, so it's a little bit, it's kind of personal.
Yeah, well, thanks for being honest. I'm a bit nervous myself, to be honest. But anyway, so we were talking about an experience you had with your son.
Yeah.
And I thought if you're comfortable sharing that with us today so we can kind of learn from that.
Yeah, just so everybody knows, my name is Doug Erickson. I have a 7th grader. His name is Baden. We first came to Canyon Heights when he was in pre-K, so that's a long time ago from that mass. But that mass has not changed. It is the most beautiful thing in the world. If ever you're having a bad day or a bad week, go to Friday pre-K mass. It will completely change your outlook on the world. And I came not just because we were going to be here, but I felt like I just needed to calm down and get ready. So, sorry, I already forgot your question.
So you were already listening. It's an interesting
Listening.
point, right? Listening. We got to listen to our bodies sometimes too, right?
Yeah.
Like, how am I feeling today? Am I a bit nervous? What do I need? And that's a really good example of just being honest, right?
Yeah. I love how you ended the mass with the kids, just like, okay, pray, and now listen. And when we talked, when we had that coffee, I shared a story about my son. At the end of last year, he said some things to some other people that were candidly not in alignment with our family values. And we heard about it, and the initial reaction was to explode, but we decided to stop and listen. Kind of our theory, my wife is Melissa, by the way. Melissa and our theory is that if you react and you don't let the Holy Spirit in the conversation, you might get it right. But if you pause and let the Holy Spirit into the conversation, you will get it right. And so I kind of have developed this checklist I run in my mind whenever something happens.
Tell me about it.
I listen to my good friends, the Kellers, and I think Steve said this to me, but I'm gonna attribute it to Aaron because I know Steve well.
I got it from her.
Steve said, like, at the end of the day, our job as parents is to help our kids get in heaven. That's it. That's our job. And so
everything's pointing to that.
Everything is about that. And so I developed this checklist in my head, which is what happened going to prevent my son from going to heaven? If the answer is no, then the next thing is this something that will potentially cause him to get to heaven quicker? Like, is it gonna get hurt? And the third one is it something that could become habit forming that could prevent him from getting to heaven? And if the answer to all 4 of those, or all 3 of those, is no, it's a teaching moment, not a reaction moment. And so in this case, he said some things, and like, it just boils up in you because it's maddening, it's scary, it's embarrassing. I mean, there's a lot of emotions, and but we ran that checklist and realized it's a teaching moment, not a yelling moment.
So that was a great example there of like self-control.
Just
Everything
listening.
inside of you said, come down like a ton of bricks.
Yeah, but we paused. And when we paused, that let the Holy Spirit into the conversation.
What do you
Because
think?
if you don't pause, if you let your brain just go, you make no room for the Holy Spirit, and therefore you'll get no help. You'll block it out.
Doug, what do you think might have happened if you hadn't run that checklist? If you had just jumped in, come down like a ton of bricks?
I think that there's the biggest danger of that is that you drive a wedge between you and your kid. You create a barrier, you create a scar tissue. When you yell at a kid, you're creating scar tissue, right? And if you do that often enough, that scar tissue will clog your relationship with your child, and they won't be able to talk to you. And then you will be shut out of the conversation, and you will never get the opportunity to be active in helping them get to heaven, because they will do everything in their power to go the opposite direction of your advice, because that drain is clogged, that filter is clogged.
We don't want that. That's kind of the work of the enemy, right? To divide us, right?
Yeah, and I think that's why. 3 more minutes.
3 more minutes.
I think that's why the devil has created anxiety, is to create that clog, to create that, right?
So when you, what actually happened when you had that conversation with him?
Okay, so we ran the checklist and realized that my hypothesis going into the conversation was that he actually had no idea what those words meant, and he was just doing it because he had heard someone else do it, and he was trying to belong, which in 7th grade is a huge part of their lives, is just trying to belong. And so we went and talked to him very calmly. Like, he knew he was in trouble, but we sat with him in his room. We physically got down on the floor and sat with him. And I asked him if he knew what those words meant. He said no. I said, let me tell you what they mean. Not just the meaning, but how ugly they are, and how it's hurt people, and how like there have been there's just been an emotional eruption in our society over these words. And
what was his reaction?
His face went from fear to more fear, not fear of us, but fear of what he had done. And his head kind of drooped, and I said, you didn't know. Let's put your head back up. Let's learn from this, right? I think if I had yelled, first off, that clog would have started, that scar tissue, but he wouldn't have learned anything. And maybe he would use those words. I am pretty convinced he will never use those words again in his life. So my son is a very caring kid. He's very caring, and when he heard that those words could hurt somebody and how deeply they would hurt, he will not use those words again. I'm pretty sure of it. I hope not. Pray to God.
Doug, that's really a beautiful example of a good listening, yeah? And I'm sure as parents, I'm just in awe of how you dedicate your lives to your children, and it's oftentimes you're just exhausted, right? And just day in and day out, that is something that will mark him positively for the rest of his life. So we see here the importance of listening. We've seen a little bit how to listen, and maybe in a future episode or encounter we'll talk about what to listen for as well. But thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
For sharing that.
Appreciate that. That wasn't scary at all.